"You people do not have accounts here. Step away before I call security." Those words did not come as a whisper. They were loud enough for every head in the branch to turn. The blonde banker in a navy suit did not even blink when she said it. Her tone was official, like she was reading company policy, but her eyes carried something sharper. Across from her stood a young black woman in a pale pink hoodie and a plain white cap. She had no designer bag, no flashy jewelry, no entourage, just folded arms, calm eyes, and a quiet request to withdraw her own funds. And now, the entire room had been forced to see her treated like she had no right to stand there. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we are glad you are here. Now, back to her story. The air in the branch shifted from the hum of keyboards to a silence thick with judgment. The banker leaned forward, fingers resting on her laptop keys, but her words sliced the space more than any click could. "You should not even be in this lounge," she added, voice sharp, controlled. Her screen glowed, but she was not searching numbers. She was searching for a reason to deny. The woman in the hoodie did not flinch. She stood with her arms crossed, shoulders square, gaze steady. Not angry, not desperate, just waiting. She had been here before, in different rooms, under different chandeliers, but always with the same tone aimed at her skin before her name. A young man in a gray suit a few desks back raised his head, his fingers hovering above his phone. He watched the exchange like a witness stumbling into a trial he had not planned to attend. His brow furrowed, his lips moved as if to say, "Why?" But he stayed silent, for now. The banker's words grew heavier. "Show me proof. Where did you get this money? Do not waste my time with stories." The disdain in her voice dripped onto the desk like acid. Each syllable echoed louder than the quiet hum of the branch. And still, the woman in pink remained still. She was not the one trembling. She was not the one speaking in raised tones. She was not the one searching for power. She simply held her ground. The banker's words did not fade. They lingered in the air like smoke, thick and deliberate. She tapped at her keyboard, eyes narrowed, and then leaned back as if settling into a performance she had practiced before. "We have had people like you walk in here and try to pass themselves off as clients," she said. "It always ends the same way. Fraud, arrest, embarrassment. Do yourself a favor and leave quietly." The woman in the pink hoodie did not move. Her silence was not weakness. It was weight. Each second she stood there without reaction was a challenge that unsettled the room more than shouting ever could. Across the lobby, a man with glasses paused mid-typing. He adjusted his tie, glanced at his colleagues, and then stared at the scene unfolding. His eyes betrayed a question his mouth would not yet form. Why is she being singled out? At the desk, the banker's lips curled into a smirk. "You are wasting time. Clients with real accounts do not dress like this. Do you even know what a withdrawal slip looks like?" She slid the paper back across the desk as if tossing away trash. The hoodie-wearing woman lowered her eyes to the slip, then back up to the banker, calm, measured, no rush. That gaze carried decades of memory of doors closed too soon, of voices raised too fast, of dignity stripped in polished rooms that pretended to be respectable. A voice cut in from the side. "Excuse me, is there a problem?" It belonged to a younger employee seated a few desks away. His voice cracked slightly, but the question landed like a stone in still water. The banker shot him a glare that told him to stay silent, to fall back into line. He did, but his eyes remained locked on her. A woman waiting in the lobby shifted uncomfortably. She clutched her purse tighter, whispered to the man next to her, and nodded toward the counter. The whisper was not loud, but it carried. "She just asked for her money. Why are they treating her like that?" The banker ignored it. She leaned forward again, lowering her tone so that only the woman at the counter could hear. "If you do not leave on your own, I will make sure security drags you out in front of everyone. Imagine the headlines. Imagine the shame. Do you really want that?" The woman in pink finally moved. She placed both hands lightly on the edge of the counter and leaned just enough to close the space between them. Her voice was soft, even, and unwavering. "Are you finished?" The words did not rise. They did not need to. The pause after them carried more power than the threat that came before. For the first time, the banker blinked, unsettled, and for the first time, the room realized this confrontation was not one-sided. It was a storm waiting to break. The silence did not last long. The banker straightened in her chair, her face tightening into a mask of authority. She raised her voice just enough for the surrounding desks to hear. "Security, prepare to intervene," she said into the air, her hand hovering over the phone beside her laptop. The words carried across the branch like an alarm bell. Heads lifted. Keyboards stopped clicking. The room that had once been filled with the sound of routine banking now felt like a stage, and everyone knew a performance was underway. The woman in the hoodie did not shift her weight. She simply uncrossed her arms and placed her palms on the counter, her posture calm yet unshakable. She did not raise her voice. She did not plead. She let the pause linger, a silence that demanded attention more than any shout could. From the back, a middle-aged man in a gray blazer whispered loudly to his companion, "She has every right to be there. They have no reason to call security." His words were not meant to be secret. They were meant to challenge the narrative forming at the desk. A few people nodded. Others just watched, unsure which side to trust. The banker leaned closer, her eyes narrowing, her tone dripping with contempt. "Listen carefully. You are not a client. You are wasting our time. Take your little story somewhere else. People like you do not belong in this lounge." She pressed a manicured finger against the withdrawal form as though it were contaminated, pushing it back across the counter. The young employee who had spoken earlier shifted again. He looked down at his phone, then back at the woman in pink. His hand trembled slightly as he raised the device. Not to speak, not to intervene, but to record. The red light blinked. A quiet rebellion. The banker saw it. "Put that away," she snapped, her voice sharp and echoing. The command broke the air like glass shattering, but the phone did not lower. The young man's jaw tightened. "People need to see this," he muttered. A woman seated nearby clutched her purse tighter, her eyes darting between the banker and the woman in pink. "This feels wrong," she whispered to no one in particular, but loud enough for others to hear. The whisper spread, echoed in glances, in tightened jaws, in the restless shifting of feet. The banker, sensing her grip slipping, slammed her palm on the counter. "Enough. You are a fraud. You are wasting this institution's time. Leave before I have you arrested." And still, the woman in the hoodie did not move. Her stillness was not absence. It was presence. It was defiance without a single raised syllable. The room felt it. The witnesses felt it. Even the banker felt it, though she tried to mask her unease. The stage was set. The tension had risen. And what came next would break the branch wide open. The weight of the moment pressed down heavier with every passing second. The banker's threats hung in the air, but the woman in the pink hoodie remained still, her hands resting calmly on the edge of the counter. She was a picture of patience, not defiance, and yet her silence screamed louder than any argument could. The banker misread that silence. She mistook it for surrender. Leaning back in her chair with an air of triumph, she smirked and spoke loudly enough for the entire branch to hear. "This is exactly what I expected. Nothing but empty noise. She cannot even prove she belongs here." The room shifted. A ripple of unease moved through the spectators. A young man seated nearby tapped his pen nervously against his notebook, his eyes locked on the scene. A woman in a navy coat leaned over to whisper to her friend, "She has not raised her voice once. Why does she need to prove anything more than the rest of us?" The banker ignored them. She picked up the phone on her desk, her tone clipped and cold. "Send someone now. We have a fraudulent customer at the counter. Repeat, fraudulent." Each syllable was deliberate, rehearsed, and designed to humiliate. She wanted everyone to hear it, and they did. The woman in the hoodie finally lifted her eyes, meeting the banker's glare with a gaze so steady that even the chatter behind them fell quiet. She did not rush. She did not flinch. Her voice, when it came, was calm and measured. "I will not raise my voice. I will not play into your scene. But make no mistake, you will answer for every word you just said." The calmness unsettled more than anger ever could. The banker's smirk faltered, just for an instant, before she quickly masked it with exaggerated authority. "That is enough. You are trespassing. This is private property. Step aside now before the situation escalates." From the corner, the young employee with the phone still recording spoke louder this time. "She is not trespassing. She has paperwork. She has every right to be here." His voice cracked, but his words struck like a hammer. A murmur spread through the branch. The power of witnesses was beginning to take shape. The banker slammed the phone receiver back onto its cradle and shot him a look that could have cut glass. "You want to keep your job?" she hissed. "Stay out of this." But the young man did not lower his phone. His resolve stiffened. The woman in the hoodie exhaled softly, her composure unbroken. She straightened slightly, her shoulders squaring as if anchoring herself to the ground. She did not need to shout, because the weight of her presence was already louder than the banker's every insult. The tension had reached its breaking point. The witnesses were restless. The banker was rattled, and the quiet power of the woman in pink was only beginning to unfold. The hush that filled the branch was not peace. It was pressure, the kind that builds before a storm. The young employee's phone light glowed red, catching the eyes of customers who had been pretending not to notice. Now, they leaned forward in their chairs, some whispering, some raising their brows, all aware that something was unfolding that went far beyond a routine transaction. A woman seated near the window finally broke her silence. Her voice, though soft, carried across the marble floor. "Why are you treating her like this? She has not done anything wrong." Her tone was firm, not curious. It was a challenge. The banker froze for half a breath, then responded with venom. "Ma'am, this is not your concern. We protect real clients here, not people walking in off the street pretending they belong." She leaned back, her chair squeaking, the smirk returning to her lips. The crowd shifted again. A man in a tailored gray suit near the coffee station cleared his throat. He was not filming, but he was watching with growing intensity. "If she gave identification, then why is this still going on?" he asked out loud. His question made other customers murmur in agreement. The banker ignored them all. She turned back to the woman in the hoodie, her voice now sharp enough to draw a wince. "You want to make a scene? Fine. Security will make one for you. They will drag you out, and everyone here will watch it happen. Is that what you want?" The hoodie-wearing woman did not shift, did not blink. Her calm stare unsettled the room more than the banker's anger. She had been tested like this before in boardrooms, in showrooms, in restaurants where her presence had been doubted before her name was even spoken. Every time, the pattern repeated. Every time, she chose stillness over rage. From the far corner, another sound cut through, the distinct buzz of another phone camera turning on. A college-aged customer in a blue jacket had begun recording as well, his voice whispering into the microphone. "This is happening right now at the downtown branch. They are denying service to a woman who just wants her money." The banker's face tightened. She shot a glance at the security guard posted near the entrance. He shifted uncomfortably but did not move, waiting for a direct order. The young employee with the first phone finally raised his voice, trembling but firm. "She has not raised her voice once. She has done nothing wrong, and yet you keep calling her a fraud. That says more about you than it does about her." Gasps rippled. Someone clapped once, a sharp sound that cracked the air, though it stopped quickly. Eyes darted to the banker, whose cheeks flushed red beneath the fluorescent lights. The woman in the hoodie finally spoke again, quiet but unbreakable. "You are not just exposing me. You are exposing yourselves." The words landed heavy, and for the first time, the balance in the room began to tilt. The witnesses were no longer passive. They were beginning to take sides, and not the bankers. The branch manager emerged from the side office, his polished shoes clicking against the tile like a gavel announcing judgment. He was a tall man with a neatly pressed suit, his tie pulled tight as if authority itself had been knotted around his throat. He looked at the banker, then at the woman in the pink hoodie, and without hesitation raised his voice. "What is going on here? Who let her into the private client section?" His words were not curious. They were accusatory, sharp, designed to cut before truth could speak. The banker's eyes lit up with relief. She gestured toward the woman in pink as if pointing to a trespasser. "Sir, she is trying to make a withdrawal she cannot possibly afford. No verification, no documentation, just a story. I told her she does not belong here." The manager nodded, his jaw tight, his voice dripping with disdain. "Then this ends now. You do not have an account here. You will not take 1 cent from this institution. Get out." The room stiffened. A mother with her teenage son pulled him closer, whispering, "She gave her papers. I saw it." The boy's eyes widened, his gaze locked on the unfolding scene. The woman in the hoodie did not move. She stood anchored, her presence deliberate, her silence deafening. The manager leaned closer across the counter, lowering his tone to a growl. "I will not repeat myself. You are finished here. Take your lies somewhere else before you find yourself in handcuffs." He reached across the desk, snatching the withdrawal slip and tearing it clean in half. The paper shredded like evidence destroyed. fluttering to the floor between them. Gasps erupted from the bystanders. One woman covered her mouth. Another whispered fiercely, "That is not policy. That is cruelty." The banker smirked, emboldened by her superior's actions. She thought she could just walk in, dressed like that, and pretend to be a client. Not today. The young employee with the phone recording shook his head in disbelief. His voice broke as he spoke, louder this time. "This is wrong. She did everything you asked. She showed identification. She filled out the forms. You are refusing her because of how she looks." Ugh. The manager snapped his head toward him. "Put that phone away or you are out of a job." The command landed like a whip crack, but the young man did not lower his hand. His lips trembled, but his eyes stayed fixed on the injustice. The woman in pink finally raised her chin, her voice calm yet carrying across the room. "You just tore up my request in front of witnesses. You just called me a fraud in front of strangers. And you think silence will save you." Oh, her words did not thunder, but the echo they left in the branch was undeniable. Customers shifted, whispers turned into open stares, and the weight of judgment was no longer hers to carry. It was theirs. The storm was rising, and the branch manager did not yet realize he had already lost control. The branch manager's voice rose higher, his tone cracking like a whip across the marble floor. "Security! Now!" he barked. The command echoed through the room, sharp and desperate. His eyes never left the woman in the pink hoodie, as if glaring hard enough could erase her presence. The banker at his side grinned with satisfaction, folding her arms like a victor awaiting applause. "She thought she could steal from us," she sneered, her voice dripping with false confidence. "This is what happens when people like her try to play rich." The woman in pink did not flinch. Her stillness was a mirror that reflected their own fury back at them. Around her, customers shifted in their seats, their unease thickening. Some reached for their phones. Others whispered louder now, no longer able to swallow what they were seeing. The manager snatched up the torn withdrawal slip from the counter, crumpling the shreds in his fist. "This is fraud," he declared. "This is theft. You do not belong in this institution." He slammed his palm down on the desk with a force meant to intimidate. The sound startled a child sitting near the corner with his mother. The boy clutched her arm and asked in a trembling whisper, "Why are they yelling at her?" The mother had no answer. A guard in a Navy uniform finally moved from the doorway, his steps slow, uncertain. He glanced at the manager, then at the banker, and finally at the woman standing silent at the counter. His hand hovered near the radio clipped to his belt. He did not draw it. He hesitated. The banker leaned toward him with venom in her voice. "Do your job. Remove her." The guard's jaw tightened, but he did not advance. His eyes flicked toward the growing crowd, the cameras now recording, the witnesses standing a little taller. The young employee with the phone lifted it higher, his courage now louder than his fear. "Everyone can see what you are doing," he said. "She has not broken a single rule. You are humiliating her because of her skin and her clothes." Gasps rippled. A man in a dark blue overcoat near the coffee station raised his voice next. "He is right. You did not ask me for extra papers when I withdrew money. Why is she different?" The manager snapped, his face red, his control slipping. "Because she is lying! Because she is a fraud!" His words boomed, but instead of commanding authority, they scattered it. The witnesses no longer looked convinced. They looked disgusted. The woman in the hoodie finally moved. Slowly, she placed her hand over the counter where the torn slip had been. Her voice was steady, deliberate. "You ripped up paper because you cannot rip up truth, and everyone here knows it." The words settled heavy in the air, and for the first time, the manager faltered. His authority, once unquestioned, now looked fragile. The tension had snapped into open confrontation, and the weight of bias had been laid bare for all to see. The branch was no longer a bank. It was a courtroom, and the verdict was shifting fast. The manager's face flushed deeper as if every vein in his neck carried the fire of his own shame. He turned toward the guard, his voice cracking with impatience. "Remove her. Do it now. This is not a request." But the guard hesitated. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the cluster of phones pointed at the scene. Customers were no longer pretending to check their balances or sip their coffee. They were standing, some with arms crossed, some with lips pressed tight, all bearing witness. The weight of their eyes pinned him in place more firmly than the manager's command ever could. The banker hissed from behind the counter, her words sharp enough to pierce the air. If you cannot do your job, then step aside. She is a fraud, and this entire room knows it." But the room did not nod. It murmured. A ripple of discontent spread like water spilling across stone. A woman in a navy coat shook her head. A man near the window raised his voice. "She has been calm this entire time. You are the ones yelling. You are the ones tearing papers." The woman in the pink hoodie reached into her pocket. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled out her phone. No rush, no threat, only inevitability. She tapped the screen once, lifted it to her ear, and spoke with a calm that cut through the chaos. "It is time. Activate internal protocol. Log every word spoken in the last 5 minutes." A pause. Then a crisp female voice answered from the other end, audible enough for the closest witnesses to hear. "Protocol is live. I am recording now." Gasps swept the branch. The manager's jaw fell open. "Who are you calling?" he demanded, his voice suddenly uncertain. The woman in pink did not look at him. Her eyes stayed steady on the counter as she replied softly into the phone. "Document every insult, every accusation, every false report." The banker scoffed, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. "This is a stunt. Nobody cares about your little phone call." The young employee who had been recording shook his head. "Somebody cares," he said firmly, "because this is not just about a withdrawal. This is about how you treat people who do not look like you." His words carried more power than his phone ever could, and for the first time, several customers nodded aloud. The guard finally stepped back, his arms falling to his sides. His silence was louder than any refusal. He was not going to touch her. The manager pounded the desk with his fist. "You will regret this. Do you hear me? You will regret walking into this bank." The woman in the hoodie lifted her gaze to his, calm and unyielding. "No," she said, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "The only regret in this room belongs to you, and it has already begun." The branch fell silent again, but this time it was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of a storm turning, of power shifting hands, and of witnesses realizing they were standing on the edge of something bigger than a banking dispute. The branch manager stared at her, his breath shallow, his authority unraveling like a thread pulled loose. He jabbed a finger toward her chest, his voice desperate now. "Who even are you? You think a phone call makes you somebody? You think you can threaten this institution?" The woman in the pink hoodie did not flinch. She lowered the phone from her ear just enough for her next words to strike the room without a filter. Her voice was calm, measured, deliberate. "I am the majority shareholder of this bank. I own the very floor you are standing on, and you just denied me access to my own funds." The room erupted in a collective gasp. A customer near the window dropped his coffee cup, porcelain shattering against tile. A woman in a tailored gray blazer clasped her hand over her mouth. Phones rose higher into the air as witnesses realized the weight of the revelation. The manager's face went pale. He shook his head violently as though trying to swat away the truth. "That is impossible. That is a lie. Do not listen to her," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. But the witnesses were no longer uncertain. The young employee recording stepped closer, his phone aimed squarely at the counter. "I knew her name looked familiar," he said, his voice trembling with both nerves and vindication. "She was in the annual report last quarter. She is not lying. She is the owner." The banker froze. Her smirk collapsed into silence. Her hands fumbled over her keyboard as if searching for evidence to contradict the reality that had just been spoken aloud. The woman in pink raised her phone again, her tone steady as stone. "Confirm my profile," she instructed. On the other end, the crisp female voice responded, "Confirmed. You are logged as majority shareholder and chair. Verification complete. All documentation has been time-stamped." The silence that followed was suffocating. Every whisper, every insult, every accusation of fraud was now pinned against the wall by the truth. The manager's lips parted, but no words came. He looked to the banker for support, but she only stared down at her hands, her face drained of color. Customers began to murmur, their voices rising like a tide. "She owns it," one man said aloud. "They called the owner a fraud," another voice added. "They tried to throw out the person who runs the place." The woman in the hoodie let the noise wash over her. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply spoke again, calm and devastating. "You asked who I am. Now you know. And every person in this branch will remember how you treated me before you learned the answer." The words struck like a final gavel, and the verdict was clear. The power had shifted, and the courtroom that was once against her now stood firmly on her side. The revelation crashed through the branch like a wave breaking against glass. The air no longer belonged to the manager or the banker. It belonged to the crowd, to the witnesses whose silence had been shattered. The young employee with the phone took a step closer, his voice stronger now. "You called the owner of this bank a fraud. You tore up her paperwork. You humiliated her in front of every customer here. Do you understand what you have done?" His words echoed louder than any raised voice could. The banker's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her fingers tapped against the desk in frantic, meaningless patterns, her confidence evaporating in the heat of the truth. The manager stumbled back a step, his polished shoes squeaking against the marble floor. His authority, once carried like armor, now hung from him like chains. His eyes darted from the woman in the hoodie to the phones recording him from every angle. A man in a navy coat spoke next, his tone sharp with disgust. "You were ready to throw her out. You were ready to call the police, and all because you thought she did not look like money. That is what happened here." Another customer, an older woman with silver hair, nodded fiercely. "I heard every word. You said she did not belong. Well, she belongs more than any of us. This is her bank." Applause began, hesitant at first, then growing. A single clap echoed, then another, until the branch filled with the sound of hands meeting, a rhythm of justice pounding against the walls. Some clapped in outrage, some in solidarity, but all of them made it clear the tide had turned. The guard near the entrance lowered his eyes, shame settling heavy on his shoulders. He had almost followed orders. He had almost carried out the command to remove her. Now he stood frozen, relieved that he had not taken that final step. The woman in the hoodie did not bask in the applause. She simply stood taller, her gaze unbroken. She looked at the banker, then at the manager, and finally at the witnesses who had begun to speak for her. "You see the truth now," she said. "The problem was never my identification. The problem was your perception." The manager raised his hands as if to calm the storm, but his voice cracked under the weight of the moment. We made a mistake." The words were weak, pitiful, swallowed by the crowd's outrage. A woman near the back shouted, "A mistake! You tried to erase her!" The applause shifted to murmurs again, the sound no less powerful. The branch was no longer under his command. It belonged to the witnesses, to the voice of the people, and most of all, to the woman who had endured every insult without flinching. The manager's face drained of color as the reality settled in. He was no longer the one judging, he was the one being judged, and the verdict was written across every pair of eyes staring back at him. The manager's hands shook as he tried to regain his grip on authority. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and forced his voice louder. "Everyone calm down. This is a misunderstanding. We can resolve this privately." But there was no privacy left. The branch was a theater, and the audience had already chosen its side. The young employee with the phone lifted it higher, his voice steady now. "No, sir, this does not get hidden. It has already been recorded. Every word you said is documented." The manager's eyes widened. "Put that phone away. That is a violation of policy." And the woman in the pink hoodie raised her own phone again, her tone quiet but razor sharp. "Policy. You shredded policy when you tore my withdrawal slip in half. You broke policy when you called me a fraud without proof. Now the only policy that matters is accountability." She pressed the screen once more. "Terminate his access." The voice on the other end answered clearly, filling the air like a judge's ruling. "Confirmed. Access terminated." The manager froze. A faint beep echoed from the badge clipped to his belt. The light that had always glowed green now flashed red. His identity, his authority, his connection to the bank was severed in an instant. He tapped the badge against the scanner at the desk in panic, but it denied him with a harsh buzz. Again and again, the sound rang out, louder with every failed attempt. Gasps erupted from the customers. One man pointed, his voice ringing with awe. "She just locked him out, right here in front of all of us." The banker fumbled with her keyboard, her face drained of blood. Suddenly, her own monitor went black. The cursor froze, then disappeared, and the login screen blinked red. She tried again and again, but each attempt failed. Her badge, too, lit up red at her hip. The young employee lowered his phone slightly, his mouth parting in disbelief. "She really has the power. She was telling the truth all along." Applause broke out once more, this time louder, more unified. The sound thundered off the walls, Customers clapped not just for what had been revealed, but for what had just been taken away. The manager's voice cracked, desperation spilling through every word. "Wait, please. There has been a mistake. We did not mean—" But the woman in the hoodie cut him off with a single, measured phrase. "You meant every word. You just did not expect me to answer with mine." The silence that followed was crushing. The weight of her authority had descended fully, and every person in that branch knew they had just witnessed a reversal of power so absolute it left no room for denial. The staff who had mocked her now stood paralyzed, stripped of access, stripped of pretense, stripped of control. The storm had broken, and justice had landed with devastating finality. The branch was no longer a place of business. It was a stage where silence, once forced upon her, had turned into the most powerful voice in the room. Every phone was raised. Every eye was fixed on the woman in the pink hoodie. The applause had faded, but the energy did not vanish. It shifted, heavy, electric, undeniable. The manager stood pale and trembling, his badge flashing red, his career dissolving in front of strangers. The banker clutched her keyboard with white knuckles, but her screen remained frozen, locked out of a system she once wielded like a weapon. They looked smaller now, not because they had stepped back, but because the truth had stepped forward. The woman in the hoodie inhaled slowly, her chest steady, her expression calm. When she spoke, her words did not rise. They did not need to. "You called me a fraud in a bank I own. You tore up my name in front of witnesses. You tried to erase me. But I am not the one erased today." Murmurs rippled. A woman in the back whispered, "That line, my God." A man nodded beside her, his voice low. "That is not anger. That is power." The young employee, still holding his phone, lowered it for the first time. His voice trembled, but it carried pride. "You showed all of us what silence can mean. Not weakness, strength." The woman in pink turned toward him briefly. Her gaze softened just enough to acknowledge his courage. Then she looked back at the crowd. "Remember this moment. Justice does not always shout. Sometimes it arrives quiet, steady, unshakable, just like this." The customers, once passive bystanders, now stood in solidarity. Some clapped again, others simply nodded, but all of them understood they had seen something rare. Dignity revealed as power, prejudice exposed as failure. The guard at the door stepped aside fully, his head bowed, no longer a tool of command, but a witness to accountability. The manager tried one last plea, his voice cracking. "Please, we can explain." But the woman cut him off with a single, final sentence. "You do not explain away disrespect. You pay for it. And today, your payment is due." Her words landed like the closing of a book. Final, irrefutable. She placed her phone back in her pocket, adjusted her hoodie, and stepped away from the counter with calm footsteps that echoed louder than any shout. The branch did not breathe until the glass doors closed behind her. Inside, the witnesses exchanged glances, some smiling faintly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. One customer whispered what they were all thinking. She did not just win, she transformed the room. And somewhere beyond the marble floor and glass walls, her words continued to echo, a reminder etched into every witness. Silence is not weakness. It is the sound before justice arrives.